Miss me.
Psych!
We are talking Hunting Ava Bravo, and this one is directed by Gary Orbach and stars Kate de Castillo and Mark Blucas, who you may know from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Blucas actually co-wrote this movie as well. Now, what is this movie about? Well, it focuses on this woman who has been kidnapped, and she wakes up in a kind of mysterious kind of barn or kind of little shack in the middle of nowhere in a snowy wilderness with a cassette and a tape player that says "Play Me," and she's then told that she essentially has been selected to play in a kind of hunting game where she is human prey and a hunter will be after her. The hunter obviously played by Mark Blucas. Now, what will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So, you might be thinking, it's another version of The Most Dangerous Game. And you're kind of right. This is an original take on an unoriginal synopsis. So the movie tries very deliberately to try and add some kind of new elements to this movie. A lot of it is dramatic. Let's discuss what I think works first of all. Okay. So like I've said, I think this movie has a tried and tested kind of like basic synopsis. You know, humans hunting other humans. We have seen this type of movie done to death. It's one of the kind of the classic movie tales, you know, along with kind of like Rear Window or 10 Little Indians that keep getting seen remade and remade and remade, different kind of packaging on it. And, you know, there seems to have, even in the last few years, there seems to have been multiple kind of The Most Dangerous Game style kind of movies and TV shows and things. But it does try and kind of like, you know, subvert your expectations, and not necessarily in a kind of a bad way. I don't want to give any particular kind of spoilers, but what I will say is the movie, I think, knows how you think it's going to play out. And in some instances it does play out like that, and some instances it doesn't. So I think this movie does at least have a little bit of originality, and at least it realises, I think, as the film progresses, you know, that you know what to expect. This isn't a particularly high budget movie. The filmmakers know here that you've probably seen multitude of The Most Dangerous Game style kind of movies. So I will give you kind of like a vague kind of like something that happened towards the beginning of the movie without kind of going into any detail. So at one point, our kind of protagonist, this woman, kind of gets the upper hand quite early on. I think, oh wow, this is going to be an exceedingly kind of short movie. And you know, you think, wow, that's incredibly smart of something that she's kind of that she does to kind of gain the upper hand. And then she kind of ends up being able to restrain this her captor, and she kind of ties his hands in front of you know, together. And I always think, oh, why didn't she tie them in the back? You know, it just seems silly that she's tied them at the front. And then later on, the actual guy's commenting, the guy who's been tied up said, well, you should have tied my hands from behind. So it's obviously the filmmakers knew that was going to be a kind of a silly thing to do. And they even sort of comment on it. And they, you know, he doesn't even let it up. He just does it multiple times, like, you know, kind of rubbing it in her face that she kind of made this mistake, for example. So there's a few instances here where I feel, you know, the filmmakers know the tropes. They kind of like, they're a bit more kind of like, you know, ride to what you were expecting as a kind of a, you know, as a viewer watching this movie, and try to kind of do a little bit different with it. And that was quite interesting. I also think this movie takes a little bit of a different tone. This really isn't an action film. It's really, for the most part, it's a battle of wits between these kind of two people. So it is much more dramatic. There's certainly an air of kind of danger and tension through the movie. But a lot of the time, these two people are actually together. It's not, the bulk of the running time isn't this guy hunting her. It's actually, again, I don't want to kind of give the spoilers away, but there are actually quite a lot of dialogue between the two of them. And, you know, a lot of kind of back and forth of the two of them trying to kind of like psych each other out and things like this, which again, I thought was an interesting aspect here. And we kind of learn more, and there's some good, I've got to say, there's some fairly good kind of like chemistry between these kind of two actors here. I also think this movie really benefits from its location shooting. I really adore films that kind of take place in a snowy environment, because I always think when you see violence take place in this kind of snowy kind of location, it's always a really kind of stark contrast compared to, you know, the kind of the usual kind of settings and things like that. And obviously it's more difficult to kind of film in these locations, so I kind of appreciate the kind of the work there, but it gives it a really bright and kind of vibrant kind of feel to it, and kind of and things like this. When we do see kind of action, I would say it's short and sharp, to the point, and that kind of benefits the film, because it's not an over bloated action film. This is really a you know, a battle of wills more than anything else, but it is punctuated with a couple of elements of kind of violence here. That when it does hit, I think, you know, it is that more kind of like, it's a little bit more impactful than maybe having it more kind of an action sequence every kind of 5 minutes, like some kind of action films do. So that I kind of quite appreciated. And we have a kind of like another element that's involved. We have this kind of other individual who's also like a party into this kind of like this duo. There's a little bit of an X factor, which I kind of thought was initially kind of quite interesting. What doesn't work though, I've got to say, leading on from that last point, they introduced this kind of third party, and I don't think what they did with that was particularly kind of strong. It doesn't really make a lot of sense narratively, which is interesting, because I feel this movie has this weird thing where I think it actually manages to kind of be quite clever in some of the writing, but then quite silly in others. Now this actually has 3 writers on it, Mark Lucas being one of them. So I wonder if this is the problem here. There's 3 writers, and the script is choppy, where some bits I feel the writing is quite smart, whilst other bits the kind of like the internal kind of logic really doesn't seem all that kind of clever. I have to say the middle of this movie dragged quite a bit as well. We have this kind of like this long kind of conversations and dialogue kind of sequences, and you kind of feel a little bit frustrated with our main protagonist for not taking kind of action. Is all I'm going to say without kind of spoiling anything, because you know you kind of realise, you think the character is realising that maybe you know, not as all that it seems, shall we say, and thinking, I don't understand why this person isn't taking appropriate action within this kind of this circumstance, shall we say. And I think the movie feels like it's kind of having this almost like a bond between these kind of 2 characters kind of start kind of percolating and kind of like you know, building through the movie. And I'm thinking, really, does this person actually kind of think this? Because they seem kind of quite intelligent. Both characters kind of seem relatively kind of like with their heads screwed on, but you know, there's this kind of B storyline where we're meant to believe at least one of the parties is kind of having this kind of relationship, so to speak, grow. It doesn't really, you know, I'm thinking, would you really think that? Again, so some of the kind of the narrative sense here just kind of goes out the window. There are some kind of like little bit of kind of cheap effects here and there, a couple of drop-in effects of like, you know, CGI kind of smoke and blood, you know, blood squibs and things like that. I can be somewhat kind of forgiving of such things, but you know, it's there. So how do I rate this movie? I appreciate the fact that they had a basic premise which has been done many times and tried to do something original with it, and in some aspects they did succeed, but I do feel there are some areas where it just kind of fell back on the kind of that kind of same kind of story, and even some aspects where I felt it became a little bit too silly for its own good, and really just kind of like, I think, undercut some of the more intelligent things that are peppered through this movie. So I found this movie to be quite uneven. And as such, I'll give this movie a 5 out of 10. So it's not a bad film. 5 is a kind of an average mark for me. It's not bad, but I don't think it's a particularly kind of memorable film. I feel it hasn't got a lot of rewatchability factor. But it was an interesting one-time watch, I would say that. If you're a fan of, you know, the most dangerous gab. You want a bit more of a dramatic kind of feel, less action, a bit more kind of drama and battle of wills, then this may well be one to look out for. But overall, it's, you know, it's nothing kind of like spectacular. It's relatively kind of like mediocre when it's all kind of said and done, but not bad. I will give it a 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.